Alexander Calder once stated, "People think monuments should come out of the ground, never out of the ceiling, but mobiles can be monumental too." You'll see this true when you encounter a giant white mobile upstairs, but I wanted to suggest that teamwork can also be monumental. I would like to acknowledge all my colleagues here at SAM, dozens whom contributed to our Calder exhibition and events. This includes my colleagues from the marketing, visitor experience, development, operations, conservation, and curatorial department, especially Katerina Manchanda and Carrie Didon. And I am grateful to Jeannie McGinnis, my partner in all things Calder. I must also thank the entire education department, especially Jason Porter and Carson McCulley, who have organized today's special day throughout the entire museum. I'm so excited about this inaugural Calder Symposium, which started last night. Was anyone there? Show of hands. Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. Well, how did we get here? Well, this would not be possible without the kindness, passion for the arts, and generosity from John and Kim Shirley. I'm truly appreciative. The exhibition upstairs, Calder in Motion, the Shirley Family Collection, opened last fall in our updated double-height galleries located on the 3rd floor. We are all here today to discuss, learn, and reconsider Alexander Calder throughout this afternoon, so I'll keep my remarks brief about the exhibition. As part of the modern and contemporary wing, the exhibition demonstrates Calder's unique vision, one that stands apart in the history of modern art and offers a profound legacy for creativity today. Calder in Motion is a comprehensive display of over 45 artworks by the artist dating from the late 1920s to the 1970s. This means visitors gain an understanding of one single American artist and his production, international reach, and evolution over 6 decades, and that's no easy feat. Last year, Sam announced the generosity of patrons John and Kim Shirley in gifting these artworks to the museum. The unique collection, one of the most important private holdings of Calder's art, is the result of 35 years of thoughtful collecting. Here we have a gathering of iconic, curious, kinetic, charming, monumental, intimate, stationary, unique, provocative, abstract, avant-garde, colorful, uplifting, and complex creations. Collectively, they are a force to be reckoned with and are being shown together publicly for the first time. In Motion reflects the depth and breadth of this collection, which covers Calder's entire career. This is the first in a series of Calder-inspired exhibitions and programming centered on this transformative gift. Thanks to the Shirleys, and with this gift and their financial commitment, their support will help re-energize downtown Seattle, increase our outreach to diverse audiences, establish ongoing Calder-inspired exhibitions, and use Calder to increase the national profile of this museum and the visual arts in the Pacific Northwest. This generous gift will make SAM an established destination for Calder thanks to the ongoing support of the Shirleys and our collaboration with the Calder Foundation, the ultimate authority in all things Calder. I would like to thank its president, Alexander S.C. Rower, Lily Lyons, Beryl Gilleth West, and Susan Brewer-Dam, who are in the audience today. For many, this exhibition is an introduction of Alexander Calder, many experiencing the work for the first time. In fact, I hope it's a gateway for aspiring artists and emerging artists to contribute to his legacy. He too was once a young and daring figure performing his dynamic and performative Cirque Calder and the shocking introduction of wire as a serious medium for sculpting in thin air. For John Shirley, Calder was transformative and led to deep respect and dedication in collecting art. In 1956, as a high school senior, John recalls in his essay in the catalog, "I visited the Museum of Modern Art in New York. At the top of a stairwell was Calder's magnificent lobster trap and fish tail, which was commissioned for the site. And seeing that one piece hooked me on Calder. Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night was just around the corner. And while I also fell in love with that painting, somehow I knew that it would never be possible for me to collect the works of Van Gogh, but perhaps it might be possible to collect Calder's works." John would eventually grow deeper admiration for the artist. By 1988, he and his late wife Mary purchased a mobile titled Squarish as the first of this major collection. It was followed by the significant additions of Gamma, a 1947 mobile, and Bougainvillea, a standing mobile from the same year. 10 years later, the Shirley collection had grown to 12 artworks. This inaugural exhibition is unlike any Calder show because it centers on the Shirley family's 35 years of thoughtful collecting, and it can only be seen in Seattle. Plus, they continue to collect. The representation and styles and the high quality of these works make it one of the best in the country and places Sam amongst a small cohort of American museums that boast strong holdings of Calder, which includes MoMA, New York, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. The exhibition design sets the stage for an elegant and atmospheric experience that highlights the combination of works from all periods, various scales, and from floor to ceiling. The double-height galleries include dramatic sweeping walls with gentle curves, with overflows from the fourth floor so you can see the show from above. It was designed to be exciting and inspirational for all ages and audiences. Sam decided to approach the exhibition in a non-chronological narrative that starts with one of the earliest sculptures made of carved wood from around 1929, paired with a large grounded black stabile and intermediate maquette from a final commission before his unexpected passing in 1976. This offers a comparative example of how radical his contributions to sculpture making were, but also how we consider the art of our time. My recommendation is to look closely at the materiality, the construction, the craftsmanship, the presentation, and the attention to detail that Calder considered. The exhibition has vignettes focused on scale, another highlight in the collection. If you've been to our Olympic Sculpture Park to see the eagle, keep that in mind as you're standing in front of small mobiles that you can literally hold in the palm of your hand. One will observe a variety of critters, such as crinkly crocodile, a folded sheet of metal with painted planes and suggestions of movement. The collection also includes works on paper, painting, and ephemera. The stars of the show, the mobiles and the stabiles, have never looked more beautiful, and they will birth many future projects at SAM. Very soon, we'll be announcing our next Calder-themed exhibition taking place in the same space. Curated by Karina Manchanda, our audiences will experience artworks by Calder in dialogue with those by a contemporary sculptor. So more on that very soon. The exhibition also includes an audio guide featuring various perspectives, as well as a playlist drawn from Calder's personal vinyl collection. So look out for the QR codes on the third floor for that. I'm so honored to have Jed Pearl with us here today. He's the author of the captivating Biography of Calder. Last night at his lecture, Calder's Radical Classicism, he compared Calder's sculptures with older works of art and architecture, including carvings on a medieval cathedral and a Baroque altarpiece, to show how Calder re-energized sculpture's muscular and visceral powers. I never thought Bernini's The Ecstasy of St. Teresa from the 17th century could relate to Calder mobiles, but I do now. With a span of 20 feet, Toile d'Araignée is the largest mobile in the show and displays monochromatic grace and truly captures the essence of the sublime. Today, we're also fortunate to have Jed with us again, as well as two additional guest speakers. Elizabeth Hutton Turner is here with us next. She's no stranger to SAM. I want to thank Kim Shirley for wanting an academic essay for the catalog to balance out the personal contributions from Sandy Rower and John Shirley. And through the development of the catalog, Beth and I had many fruitful conversations, and she wrote a beautiful essay that satisfies the Calder connoisseur, but captures his importance and impact for those beginning their appreciation for the artist. In a few minutes, she'll examine the artistic and cultural influences that shaped the early years of Calder's career in Paris. I look forward to today's symposium, and without further ado, I'd like to invite Jason Porter, the Kayla Skinner Deputy Director of Education and Public Engagement, and he will introduce our special speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to echo Jose's warm welcome. It's great to see all of you today here for what will be an informative, thought-provoking, and inspiring day. A few housekeeping things before I introduce our speaker. The restrooms are located out the doors and down the hallway to the left, and there are gender-inclusive restrooms that are up one level and will be open throughout the day. For access to all the talks and screenings, you should have both your symposium ticket and your ticket to admission to the museum. Those are separate tickets, and just keep those with you as you go from gallery to this lecture hall to the one down the hall. Also, our Sam store is open today and is featuring a number of Calder books by our speakers, as well as an amazing selection of Calder-related merch. So do stop by the gift shop on your way throughout the museum today. In terms of this, the talks that we have with Beth and Vanya today, our schedule is quite packed, so we won't have a Q&A session, but at the panel this afternoon, we welcome hearing from all of you about your curiosities and questions about the presentations. So we've set up a table with a box outside the auditorium where you can write down your questions, and we'll run through them as part of the panel this afternoon. In the middle of this talk, our Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art, Carrie Didon, will be leading a tour up in the In Motion gallery. So if you're interested in taking a tour with one of our curators, please join Carrie for that. And then following this talk at 12:30, we'll have a screening of some Calder Foundation what is the word I'm looking for? Films that were commissioned by the foundation. Thank you, brain. And those will be screening in the Nordstrom lecture hall, which is just down the hallway this way, and we'll be screening those twice today. But all of the events for the symposium are on a monitor outside the auditorium, so check out the various times when things are happening. Great. So now I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Hutton Turner. Turner is a professor and curator whose scholarship highlights Alexander Calder's international impact on modern art. Turner organized the 2004 exhibition Calder Miró, A New Space for Imagination, serves as an advisor for the Calder Foundation, and is the author of works including Calder, Scale, and the Problem of Seeing It from 2021, and Framing a Paradox, Alexander Calder's Hollow Egg, also published in 2021. Turner is currently working on a new project titled Alexander Calder, A Biography of Objects. Please pick up one of Turner's books in our museum shop, and she'd be happy to sign them for you later this afternoon. In today's talk, Dr. Turner will take us on a journey back in time to early 20th century Paris, where scads of American artists, musicians, writers, and bon vivants all took advantage of relatively cheap tickets to sail over the Atlantic, a strong dollar against the franc, and the rich cultural atmosphere that both celebrated the artistic traditions of the past and whipped them up like egg whites in a souffle. The nightclubs were full of jazz and Josephine Baker, the wine glasses bubbled with champagne, and everyone danced the Charleston. This is the environment where a young Alexander Calder would reimagine and transform sculpture. Please welcome Dr. Elizabeth Turner.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. And thank you to John and Kim for this wonderful occasion, making all of this possible, the wonderful donation to the Seattle Art Museum. And I also want to thank the folks at Sam for inviting me to speak on the occasion. It's great to be with my colleagues, to see everyone there in the across the row there with John and Kim, to see Beryl and Jed and Susan. I really am so happy you're here. Vanya, you're over here. Thank you for coming. And then finally, it's good to be back. I really did have such a great time at the opening. And last fall, the last time I was here, I gave a lecture. And last fall, I spoke to you about the connection between Calder's nomadism and the mobility of his sculptural invention. Now today, I want to talk with you about another key to Calder's sculptural invention, and that is the match between the place, namely Paris, and the emergence of Calder's radically alternative approach to art. Now here in Paris, Calder had the benefit of timing. Calder arrives in the 1920s, Paris during the heyday of Dada pranks that turned daily life into new experiences in art. Also at this moment, when the international style was at its height, Calder could experience its inventive vigor. As writer and critic Selden Rodman opined in 1956 regarding Calder's arrival in Paris, quote, 10 years earlier, he would have been an academic. 10 years later, he would have been preoccupied with social realism, end quote. Such are the benefits of hindsight. So between 1926 and 1931, through 9 Atlantic crossings, you have to check me on that number, but I believe I'm right, Calder's reputation grew, much like his miniature circus grew, from 15-minute shows of several acts to 2-hour performances of some 70 figures and animals about 6 inches tall. At the heart of Calder's circus is the imagining and abstraction of things constructed from wire, cork, scraps of cloth, and various found materials. Each could be made to perform by the artist. Not a replica, not a ship in a bottle. Nevertheless, Circus Calder accurately portrays the movement and sequence and surprises of a real circus. As he initially said at the time, lacking funds for something larger, the circus comprised mechanical models of an idea, that idea of composing movement. Today, I will explore Calder's Paris sojourns in 3 phases, between 1926 and 1927, and between 1928 and 29, and between 1930 and 33. Each involved 3 types of audiences and interactions informed by his artistic investigations and shifted his understanding of himself as an artist in very significant ways. During these time frames, Calder went from being an illustrator, caricaturist, and sometimes promising painter in New York to a harrowing draftsman, drawing in space, and ultimately the inventor of the mobile in Paris. By 1933, in a matter of 6 years after being assigned various names and places in the artist's lexicon, Calder was in passionate pursuit of a radically new category of abstraction, one all his own. Composing movement, why not? Why did Calder go to Paris? Nothing momentous prompted Calder's trip to Paris in 1926. As Calder later explained, Paris seemed to be the place to go on all accounts of practically everyone. My parents were favorable to this idea. Calder was, after all, the son and grandson of 2 noted American sculptors, Alexander Sterling Calder and Alexander Milne Calder. His mother, Nanette Lederer Calder, a painter who had begun married life in Paris, endorsed her son's decision to go by sending him a modest monthly stipend. Calder went for the reasons Americans had been coming since the 19th century, the same reasons his parents were there in the early 1890s, for study and hopefully for exhibition. His father, Sterling Calder, had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts. The younger Calder sketched in classes at the Grande Chaumière. The expectation that one made a reputation in Paris which traded well at home and abroad was still the shared premise for the voyage. In 1926, Calder was one of many, such as painter Stuart Davis, and I'm showing you one of his Paris, New York reflections or recollections. Davis went to Paris in the late 1920s, but unlike Calder, was not able to develop or sustain his artistic practice on both sides of the Atlantic. Post-World War I, Paris welcomed unprecedented numbers of American artists by accommodating their traditional interest in study and exhibition, whether the stay was for 1 month or a year. This Paris flourished on the strong dollar, as you have heard, a peacetime economy, and a highly affordable third-class passage on the transatlantic liner. By 1924, as record numbers started to invade the capital of culture, drawn close to the imagination by telephones, radios, movies, transatlantic liners, and airplanes, the American Review jokingly discovered Paris had become, quote, the capital of America. Boulevard Montparnasse, on the Boulevard Montparnasse, Americans saw wall-sized murals of cowboys and Indians adorning Hilaire Hyler's nightclub, The Jockey. They listened to jazz, they danced the Charleston, and at the Café Dome received Quaker Oats on demand. What was most extraordinary about this changed Paris for the younger Calder was not the American presence, but the changed expectations for the American artist. Few would have guessed that the torch of American art would be passed to a new generation, not on the basis of present or past performances in the Salon or the Academy, but on the future embodied in machine age America. In the 1917 production of the Cubist ballet Parade, according to Jean Cocteau's libretto, a jeune fille américaine danced before the sideshow curtain, working the latest contraption, driving a Model T, snapping the shutter of her new Kodak, and in effect, diving into the future, using American actions and products. By the 1920s, as Louis Aragon said, America could take its turn, finally confident of its own artistic possibilities as, quote, the country of skyscrapers and cowboys, railroad accidents and cocktail shakers, end quote. Paris would be the onlooker, as Léger saw it, ready to praise. No patterns existed for this type of success, however. The task for the American avant-garde was to maneuver between an America with so little cultural capital, unable or unwilling to support new art forms, and an aged European one whose traditions lacked primary experiences with modern world technologies. Now, prior to Calder's arrival in June 1926, several Americans had already attained high profiles in Vanity Fair, acting out this new kind of role in Paris. So I'm showing you on the left, Sarah and Gerald Murphy in metallic costumes to go to the Comte Etienne de Beaumont's ball in 1924. This photograph was taken by Man Ray. Here is Man Ray, the American photographer and painter, object creator himself. This is his studio on the Rue Campagne Première, circa 1922. He arrives in 1921, about the same time as Gerald Murphy. Man Ray was the kind of portrait photographer for the 1920s avant-garde in Paris. You can see some of these publishing photos for Ezra Pound, Gertrude Stein. Also, the Picasso has his portrait taken by Man Ray. And on the far left, you've got Eric Satie, the one who wrote the musical score for Parade. So he could do fairly straight photography, but he also could tone it up a bit and show avant-garde personalities and personas, or even abstract a portrait type in one of his cameraless photos there in the center. But you have Juan Miró on the right and Cocteau on the left. Man Ray had been invited by the avant-garde, and here you have his letter to Tristan Tzara, the head of Paris Dada, if you will, saying that he's coming. And he puts a film strip from one of his movies. He even signs this letter, the director of Mauvais movies, and playing a kind of game of words with the word America, de l'Amérique, and you can kind of catch a little bit of a scatological word there in the middle, de l'Amérique, but you get married in there somewhere in that long string of words. But again, this kind of play, word play and image play, but he was invited as the director of Mauvais movies, and indeed, for the final Dada evening in Paris in 1923, he does show a film, Retour à la Raison. And he was invited, he had an exhibition, a one-man exhibition upon his arrival in Philippe Soupeau's bookstore, and he has an exchange with an older gentleman. He didn't recognize who it was. It turned out it was Eric Satie. Eric Satie was exclaiming about America and the Flatiron Building and how great New York must be, just has to be, and how great America is. And so what Man Ray does is immediately rush out to a hardware store, get a flat iron, paste some nails to it, and give him a gift, the cadeau, as his symbol for just what a dangerous area New York was for the American artist. In 1922, this great new American in Paris, Man Ray, he was the master inventor of brushless paintings that you see on the left, and cameraless photographs that you see on the right, announced to his American patron that he had given up the sticky medium of paint and was now painting with light. In 1926, Man Ray's planned comeback to America with the premiere of his film Imak Bakia went virtually unnoticed. Needless to say, he went back to Paris. A bit about Sarah and Gerald Murphy. Again, the ones on the left with their metallic outfits, sort of a cross between, I don't know, what would you call Gerald Murphy? A cross between the Tin Man and a knight in shining armor, I'm not quite sure. And Sarah, of course, is elegant as always in her gown, and she looks a bit, in her aviator goggles, she looks like she is definitely the epitome of a person from a highly technical society, the American society. On the right, you have the curtain for something called Within the Quota. Gerald Murphy made this curtain for Within the Quota. He made it to look like a newspaper. Within the Quota tells the story of the arrival and misimpressions of a naive immigrant who was coming to New York. And the play itself plays with American stereotypes from movies and vaudeville, and sort of working through these very superficial but American types. The curtain makes us look at American journalism and a story of Prohibition America, and also of corporate America riding high. Unknown banker buys Atlantic is the headline there. Murphy himself caused a great stir. He caused the head of the Salon des Indépendants to resign temporarily, Paul Signac, because he insisted that his painting, a billboard-sized painting, be hung in the salon, and you can see how it outsizes the whole exhibition. Signac wanted to put it on the stair. Murphy said no. He said, and it was quoted in the paper, he said, "It is, after all, the Grand Palais." So he definitely wanted to be seen as this new American in Paris with this new formatted kind of painting. Oh, by the way, this painting, Boat Deck, is lost. It's one of those things that happened, and as a result of the war. I think he had kept it in storage in Paris, but then after the war, it could not be found. There's a Calder that was lost, and we're all still searching for it, if I'm not mistaken. The Kiki's Nose, am I right? We're all still looking for Kiki's Nose, which is an abstracted form. In any case, works lost. Murphy's paintings utilize mechanical drawing and deconstructed objects by section and elevation, much like images from American manufacturing product design. His streamlined colors and contours were keyed to the lifestyle and tempo of living well. Murphy's brief career was tied specifically to Paris, returning to America only after family tragedy and the Great Depression in the 1930s. Only 8 of Murphy's paintings survive. The painting on the right is a gigantic painting, it's almost like 10 feet by 10 feet, or something close to it. So he's taking what's so interesting about this is he's taking his father's pocket watch. This is the 20s was the age of the wristwatch. Murphy, being the son of the owner of Mark Cross and a dealer in luxury goods in New York, would have known that very well. But he chose to create this, the internal workings of a pocket watch as the subject of his paintings. Here, in this context, I want you to consider my hypothesis about Calder. That Calder was submitting to a type, a caricature of the new American, much as Murphy did in his Living Well in Paris with corporate products, and as Man Ray was doing as the director of Mauvais movies. Dressed in a wire hat and a wire handkerchief holder, Calder was playing an American type. Was he an obsessed American efficiency engineer or a Rube Goldberg type of inventor? Rube Goldberg was also from San Francisco, attended Lowell High School, and trained as an engineer. In America, Calder's wire sculpture was published in Popular Mechanics. And the sort of de facto invitation of that inclusion would be, oh, you can make these too. So this idea of where and how this belongs, playing out this type, how is it that Calder is going to come to a new understanding, a new practice, a radical breakthrough in art. So what Calder actually encountered along the way while doing demonstrations in wire, literally sculpture while you wait, was well on his way to finding a new way to be in dialogue with life and art through abstraction. How, you ask? By being himself, following his own inclinations. Post-war Paris gave him permission to do this. Calder, in many ways, gambled on the future by playing the shifting perspectives of the Atlantic crossing. Though he didn't know it at the time, in his suitcase were all the keys to success in the new environment. So I'm giving you the circus suitcases, but for lack of actually having his actual suitcase, I want you to think about a metaphoric suitcase and what he was putting in, what he brought with him to Paris. First, he was unencumbered by tradition. His degree in mechanical engineering had seen to that. By becoming an engineer, Calder made it clear that he would not follow in his parents' footsteps. His 4 years at Stevens Institute, trying out the profession as a draftsman for the New York Edison Company and as an efficiency engineer for the firm Miller Franklin Bassett, a timekeeper for a logging camp, had given him a feel for travel, telegraphy, industrial production and flows of systems, efficiencies, and information, as well as a certain knowledge. And in the end, that knowledge was that engineering was not for him. Now, as an artist, he eschewed the refinements of art. And like the followers of Robert Henry, John Sloan, and George Looks, who became his teachers at the Art Students League in 1923, Calder took his art outside of the academy and into the streets. He had become a sketch hunter, capturing sports, nightlife, electrical light, adopted urban subjects, as well as their former vocation of print, advertising, and newspaper illustration. By far the most memorable assignment for the Police Gazette was covering the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus at Madison Square Garden, where he spent every day and night for 2 weeks. Later, Calder followed the circus to their winter home in Sarasota, Florida, and filled numerous pages with studies from elephants to acrobats and even the space and rigging of the empty tent. That was the first thing he put in his suitcase, all that. The second thing, he brought a mindset of an inventor, operating a workshop since the age of 9. Not surprisingly, he bought new tools into the artist's studio. Already he used wire and pliers as devices to achieve new efficiencies, whether it was rigging up his canvas outdoors or whether it was telling time with a wire sundial. In the winter of 1925-26, he harnessed himself to a makeshift drawing tray, complete with a place for inkwell to aid his fluency with the Japanese brush, and made hundreds of sketches at the Bronx and Central Park zoos. Note the action of the strokes upon the open space of the page. On the eve of his departure, he published a drawing manual, illustrations for young students, about how to use the Japanese brush, not about how to use the Japanese brush, or even how to use his drawing tray for efficiency, but rather how to feel when you know you've captured the animals in action and enjoying the fluency of a single line drawing. He admonished the reader, work quickly, carry pencil and paper with you at all times, use a large sheet. By Calder's definition, art should be as active as the animal sees. There's always a feel of perpetual motion about animals, he said. Don't be self-conscious. There is no self-consciousness. Animals are always intent upon the thing they're doing, and we must feel that they are as we sketch them. So this book went through at least 3 editions before 1930. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, Calder included in his suitcase an unfinished idea about a miniature circus and what could be made and easily carried away in it. What had been relegated to the realm of toys in America via performance in Paris would become something else. And so it begins. In the summer of 1926, Calder signed on to the crew of a tramp steamer that embarked for England. By late July, Calder was installed at the Hotel de Versailles in Montparnasse. Among the first sightings in Paris, by all accounts, Calder, immediately upon arrival, started sketching. After all, it paid the rent. For about 3 weeks in the fall, he made drawings and caricatures illustrating a promotional brochure for the Student Third Class Cabin Association while riding the transatlantic route to and from on the Holland-America line. His friend Clay Spohn from the Art Students League remembered seeing Calder sketching on the back of a chair in front of the dome, pretending, he said, to sketch, attracting tourists. Among Calder's first letters home was the story of how it had embarrassed Bob Trube, his engineering classmate from Stevens, quote, "When I say disketched, and so I desisted." The English artist Stanley William Hayter's first glimpse of Calder in his orange and yellow tweeds was, quote, "tight-roping the trolley car track along the Boulevard Montparnasse in the fall of 1926. To Hayter, he was a colorful young American, a friend of his wife, Louise Fletcher, from the Art Students League. Quote, "It was an artist whom the French stared at and smiled," end quote. It was Hayter who introduced Calder to José de Krefft, and de Krefft's assemblages that inspired him to return to his workbench. Hayter tells the story of how Calder installed a wire dog, lifting his leg at the water spigot in de Krefft's studio. You can see that de Krefft made, there's a small assemblage. This is his Calder's horse and rider on the lower slide here on the lower right, and on the upper right is de Krefft's Don Quixote that was shown at it's 6 feet tall, shown at the Salon des Indépendants in 1926. As Calder confessed in a letter home to his parents, "When I'm in my chambre, all I can think of is toys." At one point, Calder complained, "Nothing particular seems to happen except perhaps the toys or drawing I make, and they come along so slowly," end quote. However, by the fall, installed in number 22 Rue Daguerre, he would make things happen. He began to assemble audiences for performances of his toy circus. It is important to acknowledge that in choosing to render and perform the miniature circus, Calder was adapting his art to a universally understood set of subjects, a language of sorts. And he was also organizing it through a viewing space and medium of his own devising. Who came? What did they think? A friend at the Boulevardier, where he had done illustration, Marc Rial, brought the circus critic Legrand Chabrier, who wrote a review entitled Un petit cirque à domicile. He saw Calder as, quote, "a young American draftsman," quote, a colossal boy the age of a man," end quote. Another quote, "a big kid, animator of his toys," end quote. He praised Calder's performance, the accuracy of each silhouette for its understanding of materials, his use of paper, wire, and pulleys, and his skillful exploitation of physics in bringing each performer to life. Above all, he praised Calder for the ability to imaginatively inhabit the realm that he had constructed and thereby instill the same vicarious pleasure in audiences. Quote, "Voici," the critic exclaimed, pointing out wire dog jumping through a hoop, and then a dancer descending a rope, and next an aerialist swing bar to bar on the trapeze. As if caught up in suspense, he said, "See here, will there be accidents?" No, because he knows his craft. Speaking for the audience, the circus critic admitted, quote, "And we spectators, like those children from the neighboring houses who often come begging to see the American gentleman's circus." Now, I guess we could see a little bit of this film. This is from a later filming of Calder, but one of the original acts was the circus of the horse going around the ring and the various movements. I don't know how many strings exactly he's having to pull there to make that strongman lift that. And then one day, out of the audience, his friend from the Art Students League, Clay Spoon, suggested, "Why don't you make them completely out of wire?" The first all-wire figure that Calder made was Josephine Baker, who was perhaps the most famous American in Paris. And she had achieved her fame by tackling the stereotype of the African sauvage and inhabiting it and exploding it with movements that far exceeded anything anyone had ever seen before. Also embracing her body and freedom in her body. And she became, as I said, the most famous American in Paris in the 1920s, and perhaps one of the wealthiest. Operating somewhere near the public stage, Calder himself became somewhat of a sensation amongst the literati and the intelligentsia. A friend of his parents, Mary Butts, brought Jean Cocteau, who had written the libretto for Pegade, and on this occasion enthusiastically claimed Calder as his inspiration. That's if Calder's friend Babe Hawes, the fashion designer, was to be believed. Cocteau offered to undertake Calder. Calder didn't think much of that at all. Calder was greatly insulted that Cocteau attempted to make portraits out of pipe cleaners. In August 1927, on the eve of his departure for America, the headline in the Paris Herald announced Calder's earliest visible public profile as a new American in Paris, a provocateur of the machine age. And supported by the respect shown by the French critics, this also was written in French. It also appeared in a French periodical, The Toys of Calder. Interestingly, the English version of the article, entitled "Futurist Toys for Advanced Kiddies," created by Alexander Calder, artist-engineer, Calder confessed to the interviewer, even while painting in Greenwich Village, he said, "I could never forget my training at Stevens, for I started experimenting with toys in a mechanical way." When Calder returned to America in the fall of 1927, ostensibly in order to pursue a contract with a toy manufacturer, he had no paintings, no prints to show for his year abroad, but he did bring home many objects. Question: what happens to the toys, the circus figures, when these works move across the Atlantic? Answer: the toys remain in the realm of commerce in America. On the other hand, Calder also posed the question, what happens when Calder puts wire figures on pedestals or hangs them from rafters in the gallery? And here's the clincher. Calls them sculpture. And there it is. There's the sign for his show in 1928 at the Via Gallery. This sign hung on Lexington Avenue, out on that Lexington Avenue, wire sculpture by Calder. Would New Yorkers call it art? Or would they think it was just a stunt? In February 1928, the wire acrobat sporting the words "Sculpture by Calder" was the first ever one-man show, Calder's first ever one-man show in New York. And as I said, it hung outside Erhard Weye's bookstore / Gallery on Lexington Avenue. Installed inside was a veritable pantheon of wire caricatures of popular America. Circus acrobats and animals, Josephine Baker, John D. Rockefeller, the athlete Helen Wills, all transparent, all rendered in wire. Perhaps taking a page out of Man Ray's book, he made celebrity portraits of all those involved with the show. So he had a wire portrait of Carl Ziegrosser and Erhard Weyer. And then Babe Hawes, his friend from Paris, and did promotion for him in New York. And she's also featured in this Acme newsreel. So if we could see that. And here are some of his portraits. And here he is working on Babe Hawes' portrait. Notice that she has on a wire necklace, by the way, too. He also made her a chastity belt. In any case, wire telegraphed many messages about modernity. One review of this show compared it to television. A reviewer from Art News commented, quote, "Of the wire sculpture of Alexander Calder, the best is silence. But one cannot help wondering, convoluting spirals and concentric entrails. The kid is clever, but what does Papa think?" Question, another question for you out there in the audience. Was wire meant to be a parody? By emptying out his father's medium? A medium that he disdained, according to the Acme newsreel, as discarding clay, and in other instances, Calder would say, refer to older sculpture as mud piled up on the floor. At the Independence Arts Society, where his father had been a founding member and his teacher, John Sloan, was now president, Calder would push the comparison further by scaling up and submitting two classical sculptures, Spring, some 9 feet tall, and Romulus and Remus, 12 feet long, all in wire. Here, I shouldn't say they're not all in wire. There's also some doorknobs dangling in different places. Here, Calder's references not only the she-wolf who symbolized the origins of ancient Rome, but also the origins of early cast bronze sculpture. But he makes large-scale objects as assemblages out of everyday materials. So he's chosen these alternate materials, like his circus objects. The review in the New York Times reads, quote, "Copper wire and bureau drawer knobs made their first appearance as mediums of artistic expression yesterday at the 12th annual exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists, which will be open to the public tonight on the roof of the Waldorf, a colossal Romulus and Remus. In these materials was placed a show yesterday by Alexander Calder, son of A. Sterling Calder, the sculptor." So they're not letting audiences forget that he is the son of a famous sculptor. You want to do this film here? This is an image of Spring. And so you can kind of see that he's playing with a pun of sorts. But the younger Calder's challenge to revitalize sculpture did not stop with alternate materials and the emptying out of sculpture to shape space. If Calder was to be a sculptor, it would be on his own terms. Would New Yorkers accept as art objects made and manipulated and animated as if they were characters in his miniature circus arena? The public performance of Calder with the she-wolf also merited a mention in the Times, where it was observed that Calder, quote, created somewhat of a panic on Fifth Avenue by walking down the highway followed by an 11-foot wolf. Yes, Calder considers her a work of art. As he said, I shouldn't have made her if I didn't. After the incident, it seems Calder made a strategic decision. So after this exhibition of at the Society of Independent Artists with these large objects, he seems to have made a strategic assessment of his New York audience. And he put the wire away for the time being, and in the summer of 1928 worked on a more understandably accepted modern medium, that is, direct carving. He also grew the roster of acts for his miniature circus. And when he returned to Paris that fall, he would take the wire, take the suitcases, but leave the wood in New York for a show there. A $1,000 commission from an advertising agency provided the means of his departure. In the fall of 1928, he booked passage on the de Grasse, riding the transatlantic this time as a passenger. In Montparnasse, he found a ground floor apartment at number 7 Rue Selles with a large door in the back, quote, in case you wanted to do a large sculpture, end quote. Returning to Paris, 1928-29, Calder returned well aware, ready to be the new American, ready for verbal and physical and visual exchanges in search of a new way forward, convenings or in conversations with new friends. Out and about on his bicycle, wearing the headgear with the filled with the camphor to treat a cold, let's imagine that, something like that. He's headed for the Dome, where the table of the artist Jules Pascin, a naturalized American, was always full of newcomers. So you see Pascin there in the upper left. Pascin provided an important link to the Parisian, in the Parisian art world, when giants like Matisse and Picasso were no longer accessible to most Americans. A friend to Kiki de Montparnasse, the famous model, Pascin painted portraits like Renoir and made drawings of the demi-monde like soft pornography. He enjoyed great success in the 20s, especially with American patrons like Albert Barnes. Yasuo Kuniyoshi, a friend of Calder's at the Art Students League, introduced them. Pascin took an immediate liking to Calder, as was the custom for like-minded artists. They exchanged works. Calder gave him a Josephine Baker, and Pascin in turn drew a caricature of Calder Fee, making, or rather remaking, masterworks such as the Venus de Milo and the Laocoon, all out of one continuous spiraling wire unwinding from a spool. Cocteau may have made promises to Calder in 1927, but Pasquin's enthusiasm now produced real results. Through his contacts with the Galerie Billet on the Rue La Boétie, with the payment of a fee to the gallery owner, Pasquin made the necessary introduction and paved the way for Calder's first solo show in Paris. Calder's network was also expanding. Calder meets Miró via Babe Hawes. She provides the introduction. Most likely, through Miró, Calder came to know the work of another kindred spirit, Paul Klee. Never met Paul Klee, but he certainly became familiar with the work of Paul Klee through Miró. Artists like Klee and Miró did not forsake the recreation of the outside world, but their vantage points accounted for a wider range of experience, of laughter and joy and spontaneity. Like Calder, they viewed nature as a transparent and spirited reality. For the remainder of the year, Calder reached deeply into the circus subjects for large-scale wire objects, as if studying the features of his own creativity. And I show you here the brass family that is now in the Whitney Museum, and that sculpture is fully, easily 5 feet tall. Calder dons the outfit of a circus roustabout and is photographed by Andre Cortege in this role. The Fratellini clowns come to Calder's circus. Calder makes a wire with wire and rubber tubes, a dachshund for the circus act, a life-size dachshund for the Fratellini clowns circus acts. So he's really crossing in and getting ever bolder with these kinds of interactions. By the end of the decade, he's also making a large-scale Josephine Baker. She becomes sort of a dance partner. Could you play that? And in 1929, he bundled and carried his sculptures to Berlin, and this is where he runs into Hans Kurlis, who is doing a series of documentaries about artists, including artists like Kandinsky. And so I'll show just a bit of this. I don't think we've seen it. But he's showing this. You can see why Calder was very dissatisfied and insulted by Cocteau's pipe cleaners. The kind of wire that he's moving, the kind of pliers he's using requires a great deal of skill, a great deal of strength. Calder returns to the States in June, and there must have been a lot at stake in this crossing in June of 1929. He meets Louisa James on board the deck of the boat in the crossing, and they fall in love, and eventually they would be married. But there is also a question about whether Calder would become a caricature of himself. Where and how could he begin to pursue these new transparencies and linear trajectories that he was actually developing and making through these demonstrations? How would he come to conceive and bring them into connection with the reality that he deeply understood scientifically, which we will hear about soon? Back in the States, he applies for a Guggenheim Fellowship, but unlike others, such as Noguchi, Calder was not selected. Undaunted in 1930, he returned to Paris on a freighter via Barcelona, toting a circus that had grown to 5 suitcases. This time, he does not pick up where he left off. The suicide of Pasquin had marked the end to the popular artistic Paris known by most Americans. Calder now took a studio at number 7 Villa Brune near the Jardin des Plantes, at the farthest end of the quarter from the Café Dôme. His circus now attracted Jean Hélion, Fernand Léger, Le Corbusier, Pete Mondrian, all of whom would become members of the Abstract Creation International Group along with artists who did not go to Calder's circus, Vasily Kandinsky, Nam Gabo, Antoine Pevsner, arrived in Paris. It is in conversation with this 1930-33 circus audience that we see Calder finds himself in true dialogue with abstraction. Now, Mondrian had come and gone from the circus performance without comment. But via his neighbor, an American from St. Louis, William Einstein, Calder secured a return invitation to Mondrian's studio. The experience of the space was life-changing. He called it a shock. And he, Calder, did have a comment. You see, Mondrian's studio was famous for its clean surfaces and Spartan spaces, just as André Cortège had once photographed it. But Calder recognized something else in the dynamic equilibrium of the white space with his seemingly random application of color swatches on the walls. So if Calder had a suggestion to Mondrian, I'm just paraphrasing here, you might sum it up very easily by saying he asked Mondrian that he should speed it up. What if the rectangles moved? I'm paraphrasing here. Mondrian's reply, put succinctly, my painting is already fast enough. So Calder in his studio, here, show him, after going to Mondrian, Calder decides to pursue this idea of abstraction, this idea of the rectangles moving, the idea that the rectangles could be made to oscillate in different directions and at different amplitudes. By all accounts, this revelation freed him to consider space and motion abstractly, independent of the figure, first through a series of paintings. And you can see one of those paintings in the upper left on this slide, and also within the photo there in the center. These are among his first abstractions. So he goes back to his studio and he paints. And he writes to his parents in November 1930, soon after visiting Mondrian's studio, since the hectic 4 nights of the circus 4 weeks ago, when I managed to get all the neighbors down on me, I've been painting and now have 5 or 6 canvases that please me, as well as other stuff. So I think I can finally do something with it, end quote. Calder he seems squeezed by 2 dimensions, and within 2 weeks quickly moved into 3 dimensions. In so doing, we can see that in 1930, as he turned from representation to abstraction, he retained his love of materials and his uncanny acrobatic sense of balance. Did this also require a new spatial model? Looking back in his autobiography, Calder wondered whether he hadn't been working all along with the metaphor of the constellations and the music of the spheres. When he spoke of seeing Mondrian's studio, a memory came to him of an evening on a freighter off the coast of Guatemala when he saw looming large on the horizon the red sun setting on one side and the silver point of, no, sorry, got this wrong. On the horizon, the sun rising on one side and the moon setting on the other. So he begins to simplify and think about the idea of big space and how the celestial bodies are in movement. And he begins to conceive, and not surprisingly, a new model of pictorial space which is in tune with an awareness of the realities of the turning of the earth. He begins to see it as an interactive component. And here is in a letter to James Johnson Sweeney, he has this idea for how a composition could be rigged with pulleys and people could begin moving the elements within a framed space. Duchamp visited Calder's studio for the first time in May of '31 with his American friend Mary Reynolds. It was on his second visit in the fall of '31 when he encountered the motorized works. Calder asked Duchamp, "What shall I call these things?" And Duchamp answers, "Mobile." Duchamp also helps make arrangements for the exhibition at the Galerie Vignon. At the Galerie Vignon, there is also a follow-up story regarding Mondrian's comment to Calder. Remember, Mondrian said, "My painting is already fast enough." So at the Galerie Vignon, where Calder has these motorized works, Mondrian asked Calder to speed up the engine of the motors. And he keeps saying, "Faster, faster." And Calder speeds it up. And finally, Calder said, "This is as fast as I can go." And then Mondrian says, "Well, it's not fast enough. It will not be fast enough until they are still." This is reported by Calder in a letter to Frederick Kiesler. In this regard, it may be said that Calder, as the new American, or should I say, American, performed his way into the new realities of the 20th century. A world in motion, and motion in things, a world moving much too fast to be described. How fast, you ask? Calder said, "We believe that automobiles go at a great speed on a fixed ground, and yet the speed of the Earth's rotation at the equator is 40,000 kilometers every 24 hours. As truly serious art must follow the greater laws and not only appearances, I try to put all the elements in motion in my sculptures. It is a matter of harmonizing these movements and thus arriving at a new possibility for beauty." Thank you.